to another edition of Sanctified Reason, a podcast sitting at the crossroads of faith and pop culture, talking about the issues of the day. And Dan, we've got a new pope. The last time we talked, the old pope had passed away, and we kind of talked about what the significance of dying meant. And now we have a new pope, Pope Leo XIV. And the question now becomes, what's next for the church? Because each pope has their unique perspective on things, whether it's theology, whether it's politics, whether it's whatever. And the first thing that this pope did was tweet out or put out on social media. His first tweets were something along the lines of, we need to have peace in the world, we need to have love in the world, and stuff like that, which is all a good sentiment to have and a good message to have out there. But, for people in the church, theology is very important. And there's 1-point-something billion Catholics in the world, and everybody has a different perspective on what they want to see from this pope. But when we look at the pope, who is the head of the Catholic Church and apparently something or someone, an entity that everybody looks to for guidance or whatever, the question now is, what is his popeship going to be like? What is he going to be able to do? Will he be liberal? Will he be moderate? Will he be outspoken? Will he be reserved? Some of his family, I think it was his brother, has come out recently and said that he's going to be more of a kind of a reserved, quiet type of pope, not so vocal in things. But I guess, it's yet to be seen. But when we look at the pope, the question remains, will we have a pope that will kind of push an ideology that is pro-Bible, pro-biblical principles? Or will it be someone that will be pushing more of a worldly perspective on things through religion? And you've got an article talking about that. And so, again, just get some thoughts on, as we get started here, the new pope and what we might expect from him.
Yeah, absolutely, Sonn. I wrote that article recently, and it posted, and it's up on Christian Post right now. Will Pope Leo XIV proclaim John 3:16? And what led me to write that is that over the years, and I'll just say, let's say over the last 40 years, and that would put me back to, I was right in the middle of my college time, when I was 20. But over the last 40 years, Sonn, I don't ever remember a time when a single pope stood before a microphone and just clearly proclaimed the gospel. Now, I've heard Billy Graham do it dozens, if not hundreds of times. His son Franklin, who heads up Samaritan's Purse, he seems to share the good news of the gospel anytime he's speaking to the press. Billy was, and Franklin is very faithful in that, as are many Christian leaders. When I say many, maybe that's a strong word. I mean, maybe that's not right. A number of Christian leaders seem to do that. I mean, we know there are a lot of good Christian leaders who love the Lord and proclaim the gospel. But in terms of when they get in front of a microphone, now, you'll hear athletes do it. In fact, once again here, when this guy won the Kentucky Derby here a couple weeks ago on the horse Sovereign, which I thought was it. When I saw that, I didn't pay much attention to it leading up to it, but I did watch the race, and I saw that name, and I thought, wow, hey, that's got some good biblical connection there with our sovereign God who's in control of everything. But when he won, it was interesting because they named the owner of the horse, and it definitely sounded like a Middle Eastern name. I assume, probably a Muslim owner. And when that jockey won, he pointed to the sky as he kind of came across the line after he crossed the finish line. Shortly after, he's pointing to the sky. So I'm thinking to myself, now who does he understand God to be? Because that was after I heard the name of the owner. I thought, I wonder. Well, he didn't waste much time, Sonn. I mean, maybe almost the first things out of his mouth is he gave glory to Jesus. So that was great to hear. Reminds me of when Michael Chang, the tennis player, won the French Open in 1989. and the fans have been cheering and, everything. And then he stands up, he gets his trophy, and he gives glory to his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And almost like those people saw when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, who many of them probably had witnessed his miracles, had probably, been very sympathetic to him, if not maybe close to following him. Some of them maybe even were to a certain extent. But now on Palm Sunday, as it were, riding into Jerusalem, they're cheering him. But then by the time that Jesus was arrested and Pilate saying, hey, I'm going to release somebody, you want Barabbas, the notorious prisoner, Barabbas, or Jesus? And they're shouting, they want Barabbas released. Crucify him, crucify him. So a total, not only denial of Christ in that, but I mean, just shouting for his death. So the jockey at the Kentucky Derby did the opposite of that. Michael Chang did the opposite of that. And today we're talking about the Pope. So what's the Pope going to do? Now, he seems like a nice guy. I mean, it's very interesting. From Chicago, you mentioned his brother. I mean, Sonn, it's been kind of interesting just to see. I haven't read a lot about it, but they're sharing in the media different MAGA quotes from his brother, who I guess is a strong Republican, and they've identified him as a MAGA Republican. So obviously pro-Trump. And I've been kind of intrigued by just how bold, even since his brother has been elected Pope. I guess he kind of doubled down on some comments about Nancy Pelosi, something that he had tweeted out a while back or a couple years ago. So anyway, but my whole point is it'll be interesting. He's from Chicago, first Pope born in America. Now, he lived in Peru was serving there for maybe 8 years, starting in 2015. But he definitely, looks and feels like a Chicago guy, an American. He speaks 3 or 4 languages. But so what's he going to do, Sonn? Is he going to pull a Billy Graham? Is he going to share John 3:16 when he has opportunities to do that, which is like anytime he wants? And Jesus said, God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. So that's the gospel. That's the good news. That's the heartbeat of Christianity. And I'll just wrap up these initial thoughts on by saying it boggles my mind how the previous popes, at least during my lifetime and your lifetime, it boggles my mind that I haven't heard them, that I remember ever, and I think I would recall proclaiming the gospel. And so it really blows my mind. And that's why I wrote the article. Oh, and one last thing here initially. I did put in the article, Sonn, I came across an interview he did in 2023 where he was being interviewed by somebody and all of his answers were written out here on this link that I found. And they asked him a question, what makes a good bishop or like a good shepherd, a good priest? And he concluded his comments there in that little lengthy paragraph that was written on that. He concluded his comments by saying, well, in a few words, to essentially what he said is to lead people to Christ through the gift of faith. And I thought, wow, and I even wrote that in the article. I say Christians around the world can rejoice anytime someone comes to faith in Christ through the gift of faith. So, he'll be able to flesh that out exactly what he means. But I hope he means what Jesus meant in John 3:16. I hope he means what Christians have believed for 2,000 years, and that rather than getting caught up with all these other religious rituals and traditions and things that, can sometimes become the focus, if you get the gospel wrong, Sonn, the whole thing comes crumbling down. So that's what I hope and pray that he does. And we'll see. He certainly is going to have opportunities to do it. I know that.
One of the things that I thought was a little bit off in my perspective, and it's not that it was maybe wrong, but it just seemed weird and kind of cultish in a way. When he comes to the balcony and you have, everybody there in St. Peter's Square and stuff kind of just cheering and almost like it was worshiping him as a deity. And it kind of reminded me of like the emperor in Star Wars, and, standing there and everybody's, worshiping him and stuff like that, and stuff. And it just seemed weird that he's just kind of sitting there taking it all in, and I understand it's probably ceremony. I understand he's being presented to the world. He is a worldly leader. But I mean, even when you talk about like a president, or even King Charles when he took over the throne, it wasn't as like worshiping a deity as it was watching the Pope on this balcony with the whole world kind of worshiping him. And so, I don't know, I just get a sense that, the time for the Pope, which I never really understand why there's a Pope anyways, to be honest, because we can go straight to God. And that's the whole point of the crucifixion was, the temple veil was rent in two. And now we can go directly to God. We don't need to have confession. We don't need to have, an intercessor, because we can go straight to Jesus. Jesus is our intercessor for God. He died on the cross. So, it's a personal relationship. We don't need that function of the church. But again, that was kind of like offsetting. Am I the only one, or is that something that is kind of, odd to be able to kind of witness that and see that?
Yeah, no, Sonn, I had similar feelings. And also when I saw just a little clip of when he was then being brought before this, almost like this big theater type space, with a bunch of the press there from around the world. And now he was going to be addressing the press, and very much that kind of that rock star kind of a feel. And yes, Sonn, I think you're exactly right to kind of compare it to like just worship, because I mean, we've seen at least videos of what people would do when the Beatles were arriving to play a concert, and I mean people fainting, or Elvis Presley, this sort of thing. It's not quite that level of hysteria, but it is in that same vein. Now, I will say that many times when Billy Graham went different places around the world, and he was met with tremendous respect and appreciation, and of course there would have been times when they would have applauded him being there, but like, when you think about the crusades that Billy Graham had, and the faithful messages that he gave from God's word, and the many times he shared the gospel, and you can go back and listen to some of those messages of Billy Graham, and especially earlier in his ministry, he was very fiery. Not only would he bring the full message, but I mean he would warn people of the need, and he always had that as a part of his. I think as he got older, he kind of mellowed out a little bit in his, in his style, because the whole culture was changing. I mean, back in the 50s, you could preach that way, and people, by and large, were used to that. They expected that. They wanted to hear from God, and they knew that it's not always just this flowery stuff. I mean, compare like Joel Osteen's messages today to Billy Graham's messages in the 50s. I mean, and not just the content, certainly that, but even the style, the approach. There's that term, that guy's he's a fire and brimstone preacher. Well, Jesus talked a lot about, I say like quite a bit about the fire of hell. It's been said he talked more about hell than about heaven, but Jesus made it very clear that both are part of eternity. And that salvation, I mean, Peter and John said, salvation is found in no one else, for there's no other name under heaven given to men by which we must be saved. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So this is a message, Sonn, that we would love to hear Pope Leo, communicate. It wasn't that long ago, really, I'd say maybe within the last year or two, that Pope Francis, we might have even talked about this on the last podcast, Sonn, but he went either Singapore or somewhere, you might remember, and he made some comments that sounded like there are different ways to get to God and different religions, and I mean that was the impression. We've talked about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's different aspects to, I guess, the way you approach it. If you think about it, I mean, you're talking about, the Pope going down and saying there's many ways to God. Well, we all know, the Bible specifically talks about, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And again, that is specifically in the Bible. There's no disputing Jesus' words. I mean, if you have the right Bible, it's in red. Therefore, it's Jesus' words. And so, so I guess the thought is, have we, with the Pope, and I don't really remember a whole lot of the Pope prior to that. Was John Paul, I believe, right? I don't remember too much of him.
Yeah, well, remember though, there was Pope Benedict in there too, who then resigned.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay. So again, we've kind of gone through.
He was a pretty traditionalist kind of a guy,
And so again, I guess it would come back to, what is this Pope going to be like? What's he going to push? Because I think during the last Pope that we just had, and the way at least American politics went and the way the world was going, it was a push towards a lot of liberal ideology, a liberal thought. I mean, just look at the churches across America. You've got LGBT ideology being preached from the pulpits of churches. I mean, literally pastors, or at least they say the pastors. Okay, let's just call them pastors for the sake of conversation. Entitlement, because a title really doesn't mean much when it comes down to things. So let's just call it a title of pastor. They're at the pulpit. They're preaching their ideology that is strictly against and strictly anti-biblical principles. And so you have that going on. And so then we hear, the prior Pope talking about going to many ways to get to God. And then there was, even during this Pope, during the announcement and the whole pomp and circumstance of the day Pope Leo was announced, there was a announcer from, I guess, overseas. I think I was listening on the radio. I think they were taking a feed from overseas radio or something. And one of the announcers, commentators, was talking about how now the Pope is there and, trying to guide people on their own personal journey to find God. And it's like, alluding to this, like there's many ways to get to God. And so that's why I think it comes back to, again, like we talk about many, many times, is you have to take it so that it's a personal thing. You have to take these moments to look at yourself and kind of do a self-evaluation of what do I believe? What do I think? How is it going? Do I believe this? And because let's just face it, in the Catholic Church, a lot of people are born into that. It's a ritual thing. It's something they have to do. Oh, I have to go to church. Otherwise, whatever. I mean, I've seen many people, not to criticize, but this is fact. They go to church on a Saturday night, and then, an hour, or the Catholic Church, and then an hour or two later, they're at the bars. I know a lot of people in the, non-Catholic Church do the same thing probably on Sundays when they go to see college, football or something. But again, I mean, that's what you see. Okay. And so it just becomes a thing to do. And you have I have to take communion. I have to confess. I have to. And, when you talk about justified and sanctified, I mean, that has to be a personal thing. So when Jesus died on the cross, and now by faith we are saved, so we're justified by faith, and then sanctification comes along the way as we're continually being purified. That's a personal thing. That can't be something that is bestowed upon us by anybody. That has to be a one-on-one thing between us and Jesus.
Well, that's right, Sonn. I've just written an article, and I think this would make a fantastic topic for, even our next podcast, if you decide to have us go that direction next time. But it deals with what the Catholic Church calls mortal sin. And rather than getting into it right now, it's very, very interesting. I'll just give this little tease, and I hope that maybe there'll be some folks who will listen to this podcast and say, "Hey, I want to hear that next one." But in the Catholic Church, Sonn, there's this idea that there are all these individual sins that the minute you commit this mortal sin, now you're no longer in a state of grace. And, and what we can talk about on that podcast, and what my article addresses too, is how differently, Peter, for example, who they consider to be the head of the church, and then Paul, who wrote 13 or 14 of the New Testament epistles, how differently they approached sin, not so much as just an individual instance of a quote unquote mortal sin right here. Now you're out of the state of grace, and until you confess that to a priest or at least to God, you go to hell if you die now. I mean, they really believe that. So it'll be interesting to talk about that. Take a whole podcast, I think, and talk about, well, what does the Bible actually say, and what happens when Christians sin, and then what about ongoing, deliberate, perpetual sin? Yes. Paul certainly addresses that. The Bible addresses that. But so that'll be another topic, I think, because it deserves at least one whole podcast, because that's such a big part of just what you were getting at here with, we just go through the motions, go to Mass and, race off to the bar and do our own thing all week long and whatever. But I want to go back for a second to what we were talking about with Pope Leo and the rock star kind of circus around him. I will say that I get the sense that he's not seeking fame, which is a very good thing. I suspect that one of the reasons that 2/3 of those 133 cardinals voted for him to be Pope is because they are convinced, based on his life and his ministry, that he's not trying to promote himself or seek the glory, and because I think they would not be interested in having a pope who's doing that. Now, I think what you and I were really getting at is that the very nature of the position itself lends itself to having people do that, which is unfortunate. If Jesus didn't operate that way with the 12 and then with his followers, if he was operating in a very humble way, which he was, not establishing some organizational structure. And sure, the New Testament, there's leadership in the New Testament church, but really outside of the local congregation, to create this mother church, which the Catholic Church has done, and other, even some, Protestant denominations have fallen into that. There are ways to have accountability without having out-of-town church bureaucrats that are given all this authority and power and all, and all the money to decide how to use it. It's very much, Sonn, I would say, like what we see with the government. A lot of people recognize that there are advantages to letting tax money be spent locally or on the state level. And at the minute it just starts funneling into the federal level, the waste, the fraud. If we haven't seen that now with Elon Musk and Doge and my goodness, there's no end to it, it seems. The fraud and the waste at the federal level, for sure. So anytime you get something big like that, and then politics comes into play. And of course, money's the big part of it. Now, it's tragic, Sonn, in the Catholic Church, how many sex abuse cases there are. They're paying millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars for these terrible instances. And so that's just very, very sickening. But, it's not just, to be fair, it's not just the Catholic Church. There are, pedophiles, who sneak into other, Christian churches or the Boy Scouts or you name it, wherever there are kids. So, I don't mean to, say that, the Catholic Church, is the only one, but certainly, it seems like they've not done nearly enough, at least in the past, to protect, the young people from pedophiles among them. And, Sonn, I've said for years, many Catholics have said for years, my goodness, give priests the option to get married. The very fact you have all these, these guys who aren't married, you get a certain number of same-sex attracted men into the priesthood. And then what percentage of them are pedophiles? Is it 2%? Is it 5%? The numbers, Sonn, some of the statistics that are thrown out in terms of how many, even in America now, maybe more so even than like Africa and other places, but the number of what they call gay priests, and you have to really define your terms. Do they mean they're same-sex attracted but not acting on it? I suppose in most cases that's probably what they mean. But the very fact that you have that, I mean, could you have a heterosexual spiritual leader who's a pedophile? Sure. But, there are ways that I think you can safeguard, and one should be letting the priest get married, for crying out loud, But anyway, that's not my call, but I think, most Catholics, and when I say most, there is a statistic on this. I saw it recently even, but I have to think at least maybe half of the weekly attending Catholics, would say let priests get married, but way more than what percentage it is. The Bible, God doesn't come along and say, well, vote on this, and then we'll see if it's good or bad, right and wrong. I mean, the Bible warns against those back in the early days of the church. The first days of the New Testament, the Bible warns against those who forbid people to marry. And I just think it's I think it's wrong to ask a zealous young man to sign away the opportunity to get married. And like I say, Sonn, I mean, if truth were known on this, the number of same-sex attracted men then that go into that. Now, that's not to say that they shouldn't be allowed to do that, but the church has got to recognize that God created all of us with an opposite sex attraction. And that if for those people who have a same-sex attraction, it's not because it's in your DNA. It's in fact, Sonn, wow. I did an article, I guess before this one on the Pope, and the title was something like, why the label, why using that label gay Christian is so terribly unwise, because there are churches that use that. But same-sex attraction it's not part of a person's DNA. But Pepperdine University did a study, Sonn, was it Vanderbilt maybe? Anyway, it's in my article. I think it might have been Vanderbilt. And 83% of it was LGBTQ people. They didn't have the T in there. They kind of left that as a separate issue. But the LGBTQ, 83% of those surveyed point to either sexual abuse and or emotional abuse, trauma in their childhood. And that is stunning because I think a strong case can be made that many, many men and many women who have same-sex attraction, that it was something that was spawned within them, and no choice of their own, spawned within them through abuse. And frankly, Sonn, I think the last thing that a victim of sexual abuse or emotional abuse would want to have is same-sex attraction. So we don't have a full handle on why a small percentage of people who were created by God with opposite sex attraction, why this thing has invaded the basement room of their soul. We all have a sinful nature. And maybe it came in really through their body, through maybe sexual abuse, but it became deep-seated within them, and they were violated. And now on top of the trauma that they went through, they're dealing with these unsolicited feelings that they have. And of course, what the world then does, Sonn, is just tries to say, hey, that's just the way you are. You need to be able to live out those feelings and those desires. And, from what everybody who's left that has said, and there's a great website called Changed Movement. And they used to have on their homepage, it said, we left LGBTQ plus because we wanted to. I looked at their website because I had a link to it for my recent article, and they changed the homepage a little bit. It was something like, a place where, they're building or something with maybe friends, LGBTQ friends or whatever. But I mean, these are people, Sonn, who've left that, and by God's grace are saying no to that. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't dormant desires in the basement of their soul. And this is where, and I include this in my article too, The Bible doesn't teach somebody with same-sex attraction to pray the gay away. That was a big thing for years, and a lot of people in the LGBTQ community were very upset with Christians for this conversion therapy or trying to pray away the gay. Here's the way the Bible approaches it. Whatever dormant desires are there in the basement of your soul, they don't have to dominate you for sure. They don't even have to distract you if you'll walk moment by moment in the Spirit with Christ. So rather than trying to just pray it away, now all of a sudden it's not there. Well, recognize that those dormant desires will very likely be down in the basement for the rest of your life. But that's not who you are as a Christian. The real you is who you want to be. And if you recognize, and hopefully you do, that like fornication and adultery, homosexual behavior is sinful, and you don't have any idea why you are having that attraction, nor do you have to know. It's hard. It's a mystery. But like I say, Sonn, I think this study says a lot. 83% of LGBTQ, in that case, LGBTQ people point to, I think it was 30-some% sexual abuse, and then the other percentage emotional abuse. But what I'm saying is the devil looks for an opportunity to hurt others. There's a saying, Sonn, hurt people hurt people. So there have been cycles in situations where children have been abused by a coach or a priest or whoever. And then they've gone on to become abusers themselves because Satan used that in their life, that violation, that traumatic thing. What could be worse than sexually abusing a child? But that's what Satan does. There was that deal with Jerry Sandusky at Penn State. Just sickening. But these things happen, Sonn. There's a lot of stuff out there. But bringing it back to now Pope Leo, my sense is, and even from stuff that he's written and or stated, even if it was 10, 12 years ago, I don't think for a second, Sonn, that he's going to make comments like Pope Francis did when he said, well, who am I to judge? And kind of insinuating that, hey, if you're gay and the big line is, well, as long as you're in a committed relationship. Well, nowhere in the Bible does it say that you can be in a committed sinful relationship and it please God. Whether you're committed to a mistress, an adulterous affair, whether you're committed to, or a monogamous relationship, which, by the way, I don't think there are very many monogamous, from what statistics show us, monogamous gay relationships. But be that as it may, even if it is, that doesn't make it any less sinful. It certainly doesn't fit within any of the biblical parameters for marriage, which is between a man and a woman. So I think that Pope Leo will hold fast on that, although I don't think he's going to in any way single that out, nor should he. But he does need to be clear that and what they're going to want to focus on is the church's teaching. I would say, focus on the biblical teaching, because that should be what the church's teaching is. And I think historically the Catholic Church, at least in theory, that's been their position. But when I read some statistics not too long ago, a year or two ago, about the number of gay priests working at the Vatican, the number of gay priests in America, it blew me away. And again, Sonn, when I say gay priest, according to that article, I'm not saying that these are people who are necessarily acting on it. There you're going to get probably a wide spectrum of behaviors. But the Catholic Church should come out and say that it's not from God if you have the desire to engage in homosexual behavior. But at the same time, it's not of God to act on fornication, even though God did give us opposite sex attraction, yes. But he doesn't expect us to act like animals and not be able to restrain ourselves. God has boundaries, and all other sins The Bible says a man commits are outside his body, but he who sins sexually sins against his own body. So there's a lot of theological and practical issues that come into play here, beginning with the gospel. If you don't get the gospel right, then you don't have a strong foundation. You don't have Christian faith. You don't have a relationship with the Lord. You don't have the power of the Holy Spirit to help you in these areas. So that's first and foremost, and that's why I wrote that article, Will Pope Leo XIV Proclaim John 3:16? You know, the way Billy Graham did, the way Franklin Graham does, the way many do. That can be our prayer for the Catholic Church, that their leader will look way beyond these other things that their church gets so caught up in and focus on the gospel. Just think, Sonn, what that could mean for all those people who attend Catholic churches. And when we get into that topic of mortal sin, it's going to be very interesting. I'd love to have us do that next week if that works with you and we do that, because it's going to be a great follow-up to this discussion today. And I think if people haven't ever really heard about, I think they're going to see the real dramatic difference between the way the Catholic Church addresses sin and the way the Bible does. Now, when I say dramatic, I mean there is overlap. I mean, you know, so they do get, you know, I mean, they understand, you know, the Ten Commandments. They understand that things related to the Ten Commandments are very dangerous and wrong. So, I mean, and they understand that abortion is evil. I mean, there's a lot of things to build on there. But there are also trappings within their system. And I don't only mean, you know, praying to Mary, praying to the saints. I don't only mean that. That's a whole other podcast. But anyway, Sonn, yeah, a lot of directions that we could go going forward. But I do think that topic of mortal sin will be interesting to discuss.
Yeah, and it is, you know, again, we're talking about the Catholic Church and, you know, primarily focusing on that because the Pope is the news of the day, so to speak, when it comes to the faith-based conversations that we have, the Christian conversations that we have. But again, it's anybody in the world can have, you know, the same issues that we're talking about. I just read the other day about a teacher of the year in California, San Diego area, arrested for assaulting, you know, sexually assaulting or abusing young kids. Yeah. So it's the soul, it's the person, not the entity of the church or any individuals, you know, like we're talking about. But again, we're just talking about the Catholic Church because the Pope is the news of the day. But again, when it comes down to this, we need to check ourselves to make sure that, you know, what we're doing is aligned with biblical principles. And, you know, if it's not, then we need to check ourselves and know that, okay, perhaps what we're doing is wrong. We know we're going to do wrong. The Bible tells us no one's perfect. Right. But we do have, you know, the blessing of forgiveness. We can be sanctified as we move through our lives. And we can have forgiveness so that when we do leave this earth, we know that we have salvation and we can be guaranteed eternity in paradise as opposed to the alternative. And again, when something like this comes up with the Pope and other types of news events and things that happen, it's always a good self-check time. You know, reminds us to check our souls to see how we're doing and maybe make some correction, or maybe we are doing good, and to just kind of reinforce those positive, you know, good things that we're doing. So it's always a good conversation to have.
I think that's an excellent point you're making. And it reminds me, you know, when Pope Francis said, "Who am I to judge?" You know, if we gave him the benefit of the doubt, because he did have some follow-up things to that where he did seem to come out and identify homosexual behavior as sinful. If we give him the benefit of the doubt and if we just say, well, maybe he only meant I can't call somebody else a sinner, then I'm not a sinner. In that sense, absolutely. I mean, the Bible says that who are we to judge anyone, which means to look down on them and see ourselves as better than them. And like you just wisely pointed out, Sonn, I mean, we need to check ourselves constantly. That's the focus. We shouldn't be focused on somebody else's sins, but on our own, and so forth. But I think the implication that many read into the Pope Francis's comment was that is he really saying that you know, God's word doesn't judge this behavior? You know, and you made a good distinction there, Sonn, between the behavior and then the people, and then what our role is. So yeah, that's always an important reminder for us. Anytime we're talking about sin, you know, Sonn, if I see someone else as a bigger sinner than myself, that's a problem. I'm not looking at this right. You know, Paul saw himself as the chief of sinners. I think a good place for all of us to be is if we could honestly say, hey, I'm the chief of sinners. Not that I'm out trying to sin, because for Christians, we don't want to sin, but that we fall short. I mean, Paul fell short. Now, for Paul, was it 15 or 20 seconds of sinful thinking here or there? Or maybe, I don't know. I don't think it was anything too significant, or I think we'd hear about it in the Bible, but everybody's in a different place of the spiritual growth and so forth. But wherever we're at, however long we've been at this thing, by God's grace, it's never our place to judge, meaning to look down on somebody, to condemn them. Well, I think, like the Pharisees, thank God I'm not like, other people. So yeah, that's a great reminder, Sonn.
Yeah, and again, Dan, as always, we appreciate the time, your insights as to these conversations that we have. If you want to read more about some of the issues that we do talk about, you can always go to thechristianpost.com and search up Dan Delzell, Delzell, and his articles pop up. And a lot of times we'll take conversation based on those articles, at least to start the conversation. And so you can kind of see what we talk about a little bit more in depth with some of the writings there at thechristianpost.com. You can also go to our website, radiowarp.com. That's radio, WARP.com. Click on the Sanctified Reason podcast logo. Past shows will pop up, so you can listen to some other shows. We are also pretty much on every platform that does post podcasts. You can pretty much listen anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and the likes, so you can check us out on social media as well. And you can email the show, sanctifiedreasonpodcast@gmail.com. That's sanctifiedreasonpodcast@gmail.com, and we will respond. And so, again, Dan, thanks so much for your time. We look forward to our next conversation, God willing.
Well, thank you, Sonn. I sure look forward to that as well.
And for those of you listening, hey, thanks for listening. Do tell a friend, and until next time, God bless.